My entitled neighbor demands that he can park his car in a fire zone, all because he himself is a firefighter. And now my neighbors and myself are all on high alert, waiting for this jerk to park his car in the fire zone one more time, as we've all decided collectively that we are definitely going to get this guy in trouble. Here's what happened. So I've been living in this apartment complex for 5 years now. I had some ongoing issues recently with a neighbor who is, to put it lightly, an entitled jerk. He blasts music when he's home and he smokes. I mean, I can smell it in the stairway. I generally try not to say anything to my neighbors because we all have to get along, and he usually doesn't blast his music past 10 o'clock p.m., which is the quiet time, so I let it slide the few times that he does. But he has this other thing that is affecting other residents, and it is downright rude. We have a small parking lot behind the building, and there is a small driveway to get in and get out. There is plenty of parking in the complex, which houses, I guess, about 150 residents. However, the entrance and exit to this parking lot is a driveway, and you can't park there because it is a fire zone. But my neighbor downstairs is a male about 22 years old, and we'll call him Frank for the sake of the story, and Frank will often just park his car there. Many of the neighbors have been annoyed at this, as it's very narrow and it's extremely hard to go down it when a car is illegally parked on one side. There have been a couple of times when myself and others had to go onto the sidewalk just to avoid hitting his vehicle, which can be very dangerous. So last night I came home a bit late and I had to park in a different lot. And really, it was probably like not even 10 feet further of a walk for me because the rear lot that I usually go to was full and there was still plenty of parking elsewhere in the complex. Well, when I walk by, I see a car that's parked in the fire zone, so I decide to take a picture of it. About 2 hours later, another car was now parked behind it in the fire zone, so I just took another picture. Well, a neighbor tried to enter the lot, since at this point there was some parking available, and after he parked, he asked me whose cars these were. And when I told him that I really wasn't sure whose cars these were, he was very upset because he had to get on the other side to avoid hitting them. Now, I tried to call the towing number that is on posted signs telling us that we would be towed if we parked in certain spots. I then knocked on my neighbor's door to ask who the car belongs to, and this guy said it was his guests, and he casually mentioned that he told them to park there. I explained that they needed to move their cars as they were blocking traffic, and thankfully they did exactly that. Well, this next morning I stopped by the leasing office after getting some advice to do so, and explained that this wasn't the first time it happened, but it was the first time I was speaking up about it, and other neighbors had this issue with Frank. This was a fact. I mean, I take walks throughout the complex often, and I'm generally very friendly with all of my neighbors, so we have talked about all of this before. The head of maintenance was there and told me that if I had any issues, I should call the emergency number for after hours and tell them to get the tech on duty to call me, and said that the head of maintenance said to call the towing company directly, mostly because they have his private direct line and they will have his cars towed. Well, at about 4:30 p.m. today, my neighbor came knocking on my door. I opened it just a little bit and we chatted, and he told me that he didn't appreciate how I insulted his guests by calling them idiots. Now, I didn't recall saying that, but maybe I did. But I did explain to Frank that because I have a neurological disorder and because it rained yesterday, I was in a lot of pain. So while I don't recall saying that, I may have said it, so I just went ahead and apologized for it just to be sure. This guy then went on and on about how he was a firefighter and how he would know if there was a fire going on and how he would then move his car. I tried to explain to him that regardless, he can't just park in the fire zone, that there's over 100 people in this complex and there is plenty of parking, and we all have our own situations that don't justify parking in the fire zone. He ranted about how much he pays in rent, and I just told him, well, guess what? We all pay rent. For example, I have a neurological disorder, and the guy across the hall from me is a military veteran. There's even elderly people in the complex, and when he parks there, it blocks the traffic for literally everybody. He then basically told me that he knows the cops in the town, as if that was supposed to mean anything to me. So I advised him that next time, I'm just gonna have his cars towed. He then pouted and said he was not gonna park there anymore, so I don't have to worry about anything. Well, needless to say, I was shook up after this, so after I calmed down, I went across the hall and I asked my neighbor if he overheard the conversation at all. Well, thankfully he did, and told me that he would let the office know as well that he himself will also call the cops if Frank ever parks his car in the fire zone again. I also went downstairs to see my other neighbor, and he had heard Frank as well, and told me that he would also also speak with the property manager office in the morning as well. I then texted my very close childhood friend, and I told him about the situation with Frank flaunting his status as a firefighter as some kind of like free pass. And he basically reassured me that what Frank did was incredibly wrong and very unprofessional. And I honestly have to agree, because you would assume that someone like this would definitely know better. Yeah, I'm pretty sure what Frank is doing is incredibly illegal. Just because you're a firefighter doesn't mean that any fire zone is somehow your personal parking spot. Like seriously, what is going on here? That is such an insane excuse, it's not even funny. Like this guy is already blocking traffic, and he is seriously trying to use his status as a firefighter as some kind of excuse to just be able to do whatever he wants. And that is definitely not the case. Like eventually, this guy's gonna have his car towed, and he's probably gonna lose his job if he keeps up acting this way. So hopefully you or your neighbors are able to catch this guy in the act so that karma can finally come this guy's way. Because the way this guy is acting is super entitled, and just because he's a firefighter doesn't mean that he can park his cars in a fire zone. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. My entitled ex threatens to take away my cats after we choose to break up with each other. So I decided to get some revenge by costing him $80,000 when he was trying to sell the house that we bought together. And I've honestly never felt better about getting back at someone in my life. Here's what happened. So early into my teens, I tumbled into a deep depression and struggled for a long time. Around 8 years ago, after I broke through my depression, thanks to therapy and medication, I also figured out that I am transgender. Fast forward half a year and I met my now ex. Let's just call him X for the sake of the story. Within the first week of dating, I poured everything out. I told X I wasn't ready to socially transition at all. Mind you, I only recently got a decent paying job and I still live with my parents. But my ex seemed very supportive and assured me they have no problem whatsoever with me being who I am. And so 4 years passed when we finally decided to buy a house together. X's parents, however, were loaded, and they made a nice donation to X by splitting up their savings between siblings when we told them about our plans. At this point, we also discussed that if things were to go sideways, we would just part ways in a friendly manner and split everything back to each other's original investment. So we made some offers and ended up buying a new place in between our two places of work. Since I had a car, commuting for me was easy, but for X it was more difficult. They had to take public transport every day 1 hour both ways. Eventually, we adopted 2 cats as we were both animal people and COVID had just hit. And we did this so I wouldn't feel so lonely when working from home while X was working on site. However, the high I was riding of finally being independent and being able to live my own life was very short-lived. You see, my job requires me to be on call for several days of the month, and that would usually be 7 days, but it can be up to 14 days if a colleague is sick. My phone would ring in the middle of the night, waking us both up. We never really argued before, but I recall this as the breaking moment. My ex started acting in a way that I'd already seen before in my parental home. In situations like this, I learned that agreeing is usually the quickest way to end confrontation, and so I slept on the couch not even a month after moving into my own house. Things escalated from there, and after a few more months, I was doing all the work around the home, and I was the only one caring for the cats. If I didn't do it, nobody would ever do it. And besides that, I wasn't free to be who I wanted. I received mean comments when I did something gender affirming, like getting a new haircut or something like that. And as a side note, that was at a point when I was not ready to come out yet. So I created an entire plan and timeline for myself. During the course of 2022, my ex did their best to try and keep me down, but I simply wouldn't let them. At some point, my ex decided it would be easier to give up. We had a talk where we agreed we'd mutually break up and then divide everything fairly. Now, I had every intention to keep the house, as my cats had gotten used to it, and I made some friends in the area, and my work was relatively close. Well, my ex had no intentions to keep the house, and we went on with the assumption that I would keep the house. One evening, somewhere in November of last year, we had an agreement over the money that I'd have to pay them. It started small, as my ex had listed a broken vacuum cleaner on the list of items, and I started asking questions if we could just scrap it. The argument evolved, and then my ex threatened to take my cats from me as part of the deal. But this was a hill I was ready to die on, because nobody is ever gonna threaten to take away my cats. I stopped arguing and started calling a friend, as I needed some kind of support. But my ex knocked knocked my phone out of my hands, picked up their phone and called their parents and put them on speakerphone. Then the words that my ex spoke will haunt me honestly for the rest of my life. They outed me for being transgender. Now, my first instinct is something that I won't share, but I think you can imagine how I felt. After calling a helpline, I calmed down and I gathered my courage. And I called up everybody I could think of and I told them exactly what's going on, because I was not going to let my ex win this one. An hour after X's initial phone call, their dad showed up and started threatening lawyers and spouting things like I was mentally ill and that I would never be the gender that I wanted to be, and that they would do whatever it cost to get the house from me or just try to leave me with as little as possible. Fast forward a week or so, and my ex sent over a new version of the proposed financial resolution, and the amount that I had to pay my ex was increased by a significant amount. I wanted this to be over quickly, so I just agreed as long as my ex would cover the costs of the notary, as their amount was the maximum I could borrow from the bank, which is something they thankfully did not know. Well, my ex did not agree and ended up hiking the price up again, stating that if I don't agree, the price will just continue to go up. My ex made an entire Excel spreadsheet detailing their investment as well as mine. What I noticed was in the Excel spreadsheet, everything was tied together. If my ex increased their price, the price to buy me out was also hiked up as well. And that's when I realized I had them right where I wanted them. You see, they were blindsided and thought I would do anything to not move to my parents. I argued back and forth and played dumb at one point, just to drive the price up. In fact, in an email, I stated that my ex forgot to calculate how much more the house was worth, especially since it's been 2 years, resulting in the price being increased by 20%. And as per usual, my ex copy-pasted their calculations and said to me, "This is the price you will pay me," or "This is the price I pay you." And that's when I decided I'm gonna take my chance. I then agreed to let the ex buy me out of the amount specified, and in my reply also stated that all previous negotiations of who pays the notary would also be valid. I then ended my email by saying the following: I don't have to remind you that an agreement over email is just as valid as a contract. I then pushed them to contact a notary within a reasonable time, or I would seek legal counsel to force them to pay my share. Well, fast forward 2 weeks, and I received a call from the notary that they were working on the deed and they needed my details. And approximately a month later, it would be ready to sign. I double-checked the numbers and it was all there. And shortly after, I signed the paperwork. Now, the reason why I'm posting this now instead of at the end of 2022 is because, like I said, my ex didn't want to keep the house, and it went up for sale immediately, approximately $40,000 above market value. I mean, I had the house favorited and checked periodically, and every so often it would drop in price and receive the new sticker from the website I was checking on. It dropped approximately $60,000 before yesterday in total, and that's when it was finally sold. I calculated the damages based on their handy Excel spreadsheet, and if we assume the initial fair split like we agreed on 3 to 4 years ago, then my ex lost about $40,000 of their own investment, not only in buying me out, but also notary costs as well as taxes and many other things. But if we assume the split I initially agreed on to get it over with, my ex lost about $80,000. I am now living my life to the fullest with wonderful friends and an amazing partner who is truly supportive of my life. And ever since I learned a hard lesson, I bought a new place for myself funded by my ex, and I will never share ownership of my house ever again. Yeah, your ex is an awful person. Seriously, I can't believe they would out you like that before you are ready to come out yourself. I legitimately can only imagine how panicked and how scared you must have felt. There are plenty of people in my life who are transgender who are not completely open about that in the public, and they're simply not ready to make that step in their life. So if there's ever been evidence of someone being an awful person, just look at the way the ex treated the original poster. I mean, the fact that they did that, as well as the way they treated you when trying to sell that house, overall is just so unacceptable. But thankfully, this all worked out in your favor, even though I'm sure this was a really difficult situation, and you definitely did not deserve to be treated in the way that you were. Overall, I'm just really happy to see that things kind of worked out for you in some kind of way, and hopefully you never have to deal with anyone like that ever again. An entitled customer makes my life a living nightmare, constantly complaining about me being his server, as well as straight up making up lies about how I served his family. And at this point, I'm so frustrated and I seriously don't know what to do. Here's what happened. So this story is a long one, but I honestly still feel all the anxiety, rage, and nervousness nervousness and sadness I felt then. And this is every time I think about this event. So with that in mind, let's get started. About 20 years ago, I took a job waitressing at a nice local seafood restaurant while going to college. Being the newest and youngest waitress on staff, I was stuck working all the terrible shifts, including Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, and New Year's Eve that year. And on Christmas Eve, I had a table straight from the depths of Hades. It was an 8-top, consisting of a mom and dad, an ancient grandma in a wheelchair, maybe an aunt and uncle, and a couple of older kids. And my only interaction the entire time was with the dad. He started out by ordering a bottle of wine for the table. I retrieved the glasses and the wine and presented the bottle to him. Before I could start opening the bottle, the dad inspected every single wine glass and started berating me loudly about how the glasses smelled like cigarette smoke and that he demanded clean glasses. Well, I took the glasses, ran them through the bar glass carousel washer, and then I brought them back out. But apparently this wasn't good enough. He claimed he could still see the smoke, and now he saw water spots on the glasses. So he demanded that they needed to be hand washed. When I could finally produce wine glasses clean enough for him, I went ahead and I opened the bottle of wine at the table. Or at least I tried to. I was shaking from nerves dealing with this guy and completely mangled the cork right in front of the whole table. I removed the cork and presented it to him, which he ripped right out of my hand and it threw out onto the floor. He then demanded a new bottle, so I had my manager bring him a new one and open it for him. And of course, everything was perfect when the manager was there. I was able to placate them with baskets of warm bread and an appetizer for the table, and everything seemed to be going fine after they ordered and while they waited for their food. Their food came out quickly and I handed out their meals. In a hurry, I grabbed the second to last plate of food off the tray, not paying attention to where the last plate was positioned. This caused the plate to flip the tray off the stand and shatter on the floor. And as I was cleaning up the mess, the dad yelled at me, telling me that I was useless. And when he said that, I was practically in tears. Thankfully, the meal I dropped was the fried seafood platter, which was the easiest thing to refire. You just toss a bunch of seafood in the deep fryer and throw it on a plate. The replacement meal was brought out within minutes, and when I checked in with the table, everyone was enjoying their meal. I thought I could finally take a deep breath and relax, and when I asked if they wanted more coffee or dessert after their meal, the dad demanded to speak with the manager. The manager talked to them and came back telling me all the complaints the man had about me specifically. He said he knew the guy was full of garbage, but had to give him discounts anyways because he complained. I took the discounter receipt to the man, and he actually made me stand next to him while he read through the bill line by line and loudly complaining that he needed to make sure he was compensated for putting up with such horrible service. Eventually, they paid and then they left, and I spent the rest of my Christmas Eve so emotionally drained, I wanted to curl up in a ball and just cry. About 3 weeks later, my manager received a letter from that guy. In big, bold red letters at the top of the page, he wrote the words, "Big fish server ruins family Christmas." And in this 2-page letter, he proceeded to complain about every single thing I supposedly did wrong. Now, some of it was true, like having to wash the bar glasses, as well as breaking the wine cork. But the other things were just blatant lies. Like apparently, I'd been belligerent to his wheelchair-bound mother, or I was swearing at the people at the table. According to him, I was some foul-mouthed diner waitress who was throwing food at this guy. The manager laughed and posted the letter in the kitchen for everybody to see. He apologized to me, letting me know that he wouldn't write me up for such an outrageous complaint, but he did have to send this guy some gift certificates since he wrote the letter in the first place. I could not believe for a second that my manager was rewarding his horrible behavior and obvious lies, but they always did that and called it customer service. I mean, if I wrote a letter about the customer, I would say, "Big jerk customer ruined big fish server's Christmas." Thankfully, I never saw this guy again, but if he used those certificates, I hope that he choked on whatever he ate. Yeah, that guy's a massive jerk. I can't stand when customers act this way, and they not only pretend like they're the most important person in the room, but they also act like the server did all these horrible things wrong. I have been on the receiving end of that, and trust me, it's not fun if you haven't experienced it. It literally makes you question your own sanity. Like, here you are trying to give the best customer service possible, and then one bad apple comes in there and says, nope, I'm gonna ruin your night. And this is all over things that were legitimately not intentional at all. Like, sure, you dropped some food that had to be refired, but you got it out to him really quick and it wasn't that big of a deal. And sure, the wine glasses weren't up to this guy's standards, but that's not your fault. It's not like you washed the dishes wrong. Just because you're the one bringing it out doesn't mean it falls directly on you. And when it comes to the manager, I'm honestly so disgusted by this. They claim that this guy and his comments are completely wrong, but then they reward his comments by giving him gift certificates. Like, that is so counterintuitive to a healthy work environment, it's not even funny. If you really do believe that this guy's full of garbage, then you wouldn't reward his awful behavior just for the sake of having another customer come back. Like, if that was my restaurant, I would not want this guy anywhere near my servers ever again. He very clearly just wanted to ruin somebody's night, and he found this one server that was trying to help him out and decided, I'm gonna make you miserable. And the fact that this guy wrote in some kind of letter to complain about the server, in my opinion, is so insane. Not to mention that he packed his letter full of lies about the server, claiming that they were like belligerent to their mother or something like that. Honestly, this is such outrageous behavior, and I just don't think it's smart to encourage that or somehow reward it. Because in my opinion, that guy should not have been welcomed back. And by giving him gift certificates, you're basically saying that his false accusations are going to be rewarded. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some chill music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Jerk, subscribe to Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked down below in the description.